So someone recently gifted me and gave me a Bible, and it had all of these charts and maps in it, and so I was very excited. My little Bible nerd kind of geeked out, and I was flipping through it, really excited. It's an interpretive Bible, right? So there's maybe just as much text as there is annotation and notes and explanation. This is what these verses mean. I was very, very excited until I got to Genesis, and Hagar being one of my favorite characters, I read her character profile, and it says that under weaknesses, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. One of hers, apparently, is that when faced with problems, she tended to run away. Now, I have taught my daughter that when enslaved people run away, like, for example, Harriet Tubman, they are heroes. And Hagar is an Egyptian and a foreigner who runs away from her slave owners. Batya brought a lot of the nuance of how this story is told in the Jewish faith and in the Muslim faith. But I have to admit to being very disappointed in my fancy schmancy map-full Bible. Because for me, it's a problem that the ancestors of my faith, Sarah and Abraham, whose stories are told to my children, that they are slave owners. And I'm not willing to normalize it and say, well, back then, that's true. And yet, I want to know about Hagar, right? I want to lift her up. And hey, by the way, in lots of other churches, which happen to be, I'm being facetious, but in other churches that are African American predominantly, Hagar is lifted up because she is Egyptian, because she is the woman who is impregnated by the master to produce an heir, because this story so closely models our own American history. Hagar is lifted up in other churches, in other traditions. If you read womanist biblical interpretation or African American biblical interpretation, it's a very different reading of this story. And it's one that says this text is a problem. And in our United Church of Christ, we do that. We don't think it means that we have to take the Bible and chuck it, right? We can say, hey, this does not sit well. Where is the hope in this? We wrestle. In our modern testimony, Adrienne Maree Brown says that she is queer and poly and black and female, she has felt trapped in the imagination of others. And I read that and I thought immediately of Hagar. I thought of how that story of her has been trapped, at least for me, growing up in white church, never heard her story until I got to seminary. Never had anyone say, Sarah and Abraham had slaves, and we don't think that was okay. And so I chose this story in Genesis this morning because I'm going to spend this month of September where we get to be together. Our senior minister, who we normally rotate, he is on leave, and I get this time with you. And so I'm bringing you this book, Emergent Strategy, by Adrienne Maree Brown, as a series for the month of September. I have to be really transparent and say that this is not a church book. It's not even really a Christian book, and it's an exciting book. And what I'd like to do is bring it into conversation with the Bible. Bring this book that is new and is getting a lot of press in organizing circles among community organizers because of the way that it talks about change. That's her focus. How do we change? The world is changing, and by the way, we're in crisis. And how do we shape that? Where's the hope for us in how we organize ourselves? I'm less curious about this book as it might pertain to us as a nonprofit church organization, and I'm more curious about the spirituality of change and how what she says might have implications when brought together with our old sacred stories. So that's what we're going to do for September. And I have some copies of this book, Emergent Strategy, that I've put in the church library. If you have the means and can buy a copy and support independent press, because of course she's a community organizer in Detroit and has no money, and so you would help the revolution by purchasing a copy, go do that. And then next week, so not this week, but next week, either Hector or I will do an informal book discussion. We'll put that on the calendar. We haven't figured out the exact date and time, so that if you want to, we can also discuss it. You don't just hear my voice talking about this book. But I'm excited about what it means when we take something that is mostly in secular space and bring it into our sacred story and see how they connect. So here's what I notice, reading these two things together. How does our faith, tradition, the stories we inherit, set the boundaries of what we imagine? How does our faith tradition set the boundaries of our imagination? And then, different question, how does our spiritual experience, what happens in our bodies when we pray, how does that shape what we can imagine? Because Adrienne is reaching for, if we framed our problems differently, we would find different solutions, right? It's about what we imagine. If we imagine always the other, the danger, the foreigner, the stranger, then we respond out of fear. How do we change our imagination? When it is seen as an act of resistance or protest to wear a t-shirt that I've seen that says, "I've met God and she's black," we've mapped the limits of our dominant culture imagination about God, right? Right there. The fact that that is radical in any way. And people I have heard say, hey, this Christian faith, I don't know, is it still relevant? They talk about recovering our prophets, as if faith was ever irrelevant to people who were enslaved and were struggling for freedom, or to undocumented immigrants who are praying novenas as they cross the borders and seek safety from the rising flood. It's always been relevant, just depends on who's telling the story and where they sit. How does our spiritual experience shape what we imagine? What I have noticed among all of you is that we get in community with people of other faith, the beloved community work that Hector and so many are doing, and we feel excited at the multiplicity of names for God. We feel like God is richer and bigger the more faiths gather. And I've also seen us in our spiritual experience compelled to prayer because of the world, right? I have seen you rising up because of the injustice, that coming out, like just a compulsion that means that we need to say and hear strong words. We need to say things like, God cares more about people than ratings, right? God calls us to be peacemakers, to end war, care for the poor and widow, welcome the immigrant and stranger. And so we oppose ICE. We call for an end to deportations. We urge the president tomorrow not to dismiss the stopgap, imperfect as it is, of DACA. We refute the Nashville Statement in the strongest possible terms. And we declare God's love for all people. Because our spiritual experience is disconnected from our faith tradition. The stories that we hear, there's no way to sugarcoat it, right? The story of Hagar is the othering. She is given descendants and she is cast out. And she is the mother of Ishmael, who is the father of Muhammad, who is the prophet of Islam. Like that's in the tradition. But in our spiritual experience, we see God in every person around us. We have this deep longing for peace. We have this hunger for justice. And we're here because we're searching for hope about how to turn the crisis and the change toward the good. So when we encounter these sacred stories, how do we participate in them? How do we wrestle? How do we push back? As Batya said, there's more of Hagar's story. There's the one we read and then another one. 2 different authors wrote that. And what I would invite us into is our own imagination. Maybe God tells Hagar to go back. There's political reasons why they would write it that way. Maybe she does go back, but maybe she doesn't. Maybe she goes home. In fact, there's something really wonderful about this passage in Genesis that I discovered while studying it. The translation of God's name that she gives, here it was, "Did I still remain alive?" They have no idea what she actually meant. The scholarly consensus is we have no idea. Somebody even said the Hebrew is corrupt. That's so exciting, right? They literally don't know what it means. It's as if when an enslaved foreign woman names God, it breaks the Bible, right? So there's a crack. There's a chance for liberation right there. That's what I'm talking about. That's that emerging strategy. That's that emergence. It's the fact that we're able to lift that up. What if that, and not, Abraham and the promise and the stars. I mean, that's great, but we've been hearing that. What I want to hear is when the Bible gets broken, what happens next? And since I think that ancestors are with us, and she might be right here, I want to just ask her, Hagar, what did you say? God saw you, and what did God see? Did God see a runaway slave avoiding her misfortune? Or a woman bold enough to meet her master's God in the wilderness and say, well, forget what my masters say, God. This is what I am going to call you. I'm going to call you Elroy, who sees me. Adrienne says we have all of the information needed for change. It's not facts that we need, it's longing. It's the will to imagine and implement something else. We're living in the ancestral imagination, in what our ancestors imagined was possible. And they wanted safety and abundance and certainty, and we have outgrown that dream. We know that's not what we need. We are not willing to have people othered and cast out and marginalized. We have been trapped in an imagination that includes manifest destiny and colonization, that others and deems people disposable. But now we're invited, we're compelled by our hunger and our longing to engage our imagination to break free. In her book, Adrienne says, what we pay attention to grows. So I'm thinking about how we grow what we are all imagining, what we are all creating into something big enough that it becomes a tipping point for the great turning, the new economy, the new world. So what do you imagine? Here, I know you, some of you. When you pray, what is the image, what is the name that you use for God? This is a chance for you to tell me. So sometimes I say mama, that works for me. And I know some of you have been like, mama, well, whatever. You didn't meet my mom, so not for me, but okay, Pastor, go ahead. So I say mama, but what do you say, or when you pray? Daniel? The I am. So, Infinite love. Holiness. Papa. Creator. Universe. Amazing grace. Oh. Compañero. At camp we said, maker of the trees, maker of the trees. My daughter would say ocean. She loves the ocean, ocean. The space between, the space between. my primary partner. So universe, the space between, mystery, maker of trees, Manero, see us right now. See us struggling in Houston through the floods. See us in Southeast Asia. See the missiles fired by North Korea and the nuclear tests. Read the Nashville statement. See the dreamers, the immigrants waiting on DACA. Hear our spirits crying out for a change that brings justice. Like Hagar, may we say, in all of these names, which I hope you will share with one another more and more, and not just with me. Holy One, you see us, and what's more, we see you. And we name you justice, and we name you infinite love for everyone, and we name you healing of the land and blessing for all people. And so we will not go back. We will go on towards home until no one is foreign, until there is no border to cross, until we are truly one body, until all people are free. Amen.